Well, hello everyone. My name is Venerable Wade Buripanyo, and I am speaking to you from Empty Cloud Monastery. This is the regular Friday morning live stream. This morning we'll be doing a Sutta study. The sutta that I'm looking at, that I'd like to discuss today, is the Vitakka Santana Sutta, number 20 in the Majjhima Nikaya. Again, that's number 20 in the Majjhima Nikaya, the Vitakka Santana Sutta, by Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation that is called the removal of distracting thoughts. I'm sure this one can be found on Sutta Central. For all those of you who would like to read along, perhaps see some alternate translations. It's a very it's one of the kind of a fundamental sutta. This is frequently studied and frequently translated, so I'm sure that there are alternates there as well at Sutta Central. Perhaps also at Access to Insight if you like that site also. Okay, seeing we have some people sending in Anjalis already and greetings. So I'd like to start with the traditional Namo Tassa, homage to the Blessed One, and then we'll get into the sutta. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Bhutang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. All right, so we have S. Jeff and Karuna, Poonam, Tate, Jayanta, sending in their greetings and Anjalis. All right, so again, the Vitakka Santana Sutta, number 20 in the Majjhima Nikaya, the removal of distracting thoughts. Okay, and the sutta opens with setting the scene, where we have, thus have I heard, that the Blessed One was at Sawati in Jeta's Grove, Anatta Pindika's Park. And he goes straight into addressing the bhikkhus. Bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is pursuing the higher mind, from time to time he should give attention to 5 signs. What are the 5? Okay. And then he goes into a list of the 5 signs, but with each one, he goes into detail about what to do in regard to it. So it's 5 rather long paragraphs, but they refer back to this idea that bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is pursuing the higher mind, from time to time he should give attention to 5 signs. What are the 5? I'd like to mention something in relation to this introductory sentence. It says, when a bhikkhu is pursuing the higher mind. And this is a reference to one of the 3 trainings for the bhikkhus and for the bhikkhunis. The training in higher sila, often translated as morality or virtue. So the higher sila, adhi sila, higher virtue or higher morality. The second one being higher mind, which is the adhicitta. And it refers basically to concentrating the mind and calming the mind and purifying the mind, at least temporarily, through the practice of meditation. And then the adhipanya is the third one, which is the higher wisdom. This is the discernment that sees the rise and fall of things. It sees the cause and effect relationships playing out. It sees the Four Noble Truths when it's come to its full culmination. And so here he's talking about a bhikkhu pursuing the higher mind. That means that the practitioner is trying to still the mind, trying to bring the mind to concentration in the practice of meditation. Okay, so what are the 5? The first one is, here bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is giving attention to some sign, and owing to that sign there arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion, then he should give attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome. When he gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, then any evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With the abandoning of them, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. Just as a skilled carpenter or his apprentice might knock out, remove, and extract a coarse peg by means of a fine one, so too, when a bhikkhu gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. Okay. So this is the first sign in the list. When a bhikkhu is giving attention to some sign, and owing to that sign, there arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion. Okay. Now, when the term here, sign, refers to some object of awareness. That's the meaning of the word sign in this context. So when the practitioner is meditating, an object of awareness might come up. So, for example, he might start thinking about something that happened in the past. Or she might start fantasizing about something that might happen in the future. These are just a couple of examples. They might start thinking about something that gives rise to thoughts of romance, romantic feelings, for example. These are just a few examples. So the sign is this object of awareness that comes up. Even something, I don't mean, when I say an object of awareness, I don't mean something necessarily within the mind, even though my example is related to that, but also perhaps something else like a feeling in the body, pain while meditating, for example, or perhaps a sound coming from externally. So it's some sensory experience. When a bhikkhu is giving attention to some sign, and owing to that sign, there arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts. And so when the sign arises, say we hear something or we feel something in the body or we have a thought, and then based on that, the heart gives rise to unwholesome mental states. And so connected with desire, with hate, or with delusion. Then the Buddha recommends that in that case, what the practitioner can do is pay attention to some sign connected with what is wholesome. Okay. So examples of this would be, for example, if one is experiencing desire, say desire for romance, for example, this is one, or desire for food, something like this. The practitioner could focus on a wholesome sign, such as the contemplation of repulsiveness, for example, the 32 parts of the body. Or the corpse contemplations, for example, or the contemplation of repulsiveness of food, that which is unattractive about food. If one is having some sensory experience that brings up feelings of aversion, such as hatred or fear or anxiety or something like this, one could focus on a meditation object that would bring up wholesome mental states. So, for example, loving kindness, or in regard to fear, perhaps recollection of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. These are some examples. If one is experiencing anxiety, one could bring attention to recollection of peace. Something as simple as thinking, may I be calm, may I be calm. Okay. And then with regard to delusion, this could be like a speculative thinking, for example, as I mentioned, kind of like fantasies about the future or memories of the past. One can bring attention back to the breath. This is a very good object for kind of bringing one back into the present moment and cutting off discursive thought as well. And so the Buddha goes on to explain when the practitioner gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, then any evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With the abandoning of them, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. Just as a skilled carpenter or his apprentice might knock out, remove, and extract a coarse peg by means of a fine one, so too, when a bhikkhu gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. So the metaphor here of knocking out a coarse peg by means of a fine one, it refers to a situation where, say for example, you have a board with a hole in it, and there's a peg stuck inside. So, for example, a square or a tubular piece of wood that's stuck inside. And the carpenter it might be very difficult to push it out somehow. So he'd take a thinner one and place it end to end with the peg that's stuck, and using a hammer, knock out the other peg so that it would come out the other side. And in the same way, the Buddha is saying you can use a wholesome sign, that is a wholesome object or theme, for example, another word that you use in this context, a wholesome theme to knock out of the mind an unwholesome theme. That is a theme associated with, or thoughts associated with desire, with hate, and with delusion. Okay. And perhaps a note that's useful to bring up with regard to these kinds of thoughts, unwholesome thoughts and wholesome thoughts, is that this relates to the factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, called right thought, simply, and a translation of Samma Sankappa. The Buddha relates in that factor of the Noble Eightfold Path that right thoughts are thoughts associated with non-desire, with non-hatred, and with non-delusion. And so this is an effort by the meditator to get back into the area of right thought by knocking the kind of wrong thoughts out of the mind, thoughts associated with desire, with hatred, and with delusion. There's actually a story in another sutta where the Buddha contemplates, or I should say retells, how he came to the process of understanding this in his own meditation practice, where he segregated in his mind two different kinds of thought, noticing that thoughts associated with hatred, with desire, and with delusion were non-conducive to meditation and to gaining wisdom and to making the mind quieter. But he thought that other kinds of thoughts could be, in his experience. And so he made a point in his meditation practice from that point forward to notice what kinds of thoughts he was having and to classify them accordingly. And if they fell into the category of hatred, desire, or delusion, then he immediately noticed them as being unskillful, and he would strive to go against them. And so this is the first method that he offers for doing that, knocking them out of the mind with a wholesome object. Okay, then the next paragraph, he talks about the second kind of sign. If, while he is giving attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, there still arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion, then he should examine the danger in those thoughts. Thus, these thoughts are unwholesome. They are reprehensible. They result in suffering. When he examines the danger in those thoughts, then any evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With the abandoning of them, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. Just as a man or a woman, young, youthful, and fond of ornaments, would be horrified, humiliated, and disgusted if the carcass of a snake or a dog or a human being were hung around his or her neck. So too, when a bhikkhu examines the danger in those thoughts, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. Okay. So in this paragraph, he's talking about the second kind of sign. Interestingly, this is the sign connected with what is wholesome. So this is in the case where the meditator is trying to bring attention to a wholesome thought, but still thoughts of hatred or desire or delusion are arising. Well, then what do you do if you're already applying the first kind of remedy and it doesn't seem to be working? And he says, in that case, then you examine the danger in those thoughts, thinking these thoughts are unwholesome, they're reprehensible, and they result in suffering. Okay. And so this is an actual contemplation you can do based on your own experience and your own wisdom and the teachings you've heard about these kinds of thoughts. So, for example, again, if you're trying to practice, say, the 32 parts of the body contemplation, or the repulsiveness in food, but still the desire for romance, for example, or the desire for food, it doesn't go away, it doesn't seem to be working. Well, then this is an alternate method you can use. Similarly, if you're trying to practice loving kindness meditation, or if you're practicing uh, recollection of the Buddha, one that's recommended for going against fear, or if you're recollecting peace to help calm anxiety, or if you're trying to go back to the breath, but you're still your mind is still going into speculative thought, then think about the drawbacks of the kinds of thoughts that you're having. So, with, for example, a desire for romance, one might actually think about all of the problems associated with romantic affairs. Think about how difficult it is to find a suitable partner. Think about how hard it is to get to know whether or not they're really right for you or not. Think about the problems that come up between partners in romance, and attending in this way to the negative aspects of romantic affairs. Then the mind will become calmer. Become less infatuated with these kinds of thoughts. So you can do the same with the others. Thinking about what's unwholesome, or what's disadvantageous to the other kinds of thoughts as well, until the mind becomes calmer and lets go of them, and then you can return back to your meditation theme. In the third paragraph, we have the third kind of sign. If, while he is examining the danger in those thoughts, there still arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion, then he should try to forget those thoughts and should not give attention to them. When he tries to forget those thoughts and does not give attention to them, then any evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With the abandoning of them, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. Just as a man with good eyes, who did not want to see forms that had come within range of sight, would either shut his eyes or look away, so too, when a bhikkhu tries to forget those thoughts and does not give attention to them, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. Okay, so this third kind of sign is actually the practice of examining the danger in those thoughts that we were just talking about. So if one has tried to replace the unwholesome thoughts with a wholesome theme, such as a wholesome meditation object, and it still doesn't work, and then so you try examining the danger in the thoughts that you're having, and still they keep coming up, then the Buddha is recommending that the third step is to just simply try to forget them and not pay attention to them. And so this is quite a simple technique in theory, but I think many of us know that it may be difficult to actually implement. To some extent, this is my own gloss, my own thoughts on this. That when you're meditating, you're being kind of bombarded by these kinds of thoughts that keep coming up. If you simply try to forget them and move the mind back to the meditation object you're trying to work on, for example, the original meditation theme, I think it comes down to the power in your mind, how strong your mind is, how strong it is determines how easily you can get it to do what you want it to do. Just stop thinking about that, or just forget about it and put it out of your mind. And so so some people are very strong-willed; they have very, very strong minds, and others not so. Frankly, and according to the masters of the Thai the Thai forest traditions comes down to your parami, your spiritual virtues. So the energy you have, the spiritual virtue of generosity, for example, or patient endurance, metta, also loving kindness and equanimity. There's this mix of parami, and so I could submit that as one way of looking at this. That if you develop your parami, it feeds into your strength of mind, and then your ability to kind of maneuver it and do with it what you want. So in this case, kind of forgetting about and diverting the mind from those kinds of unwholesome thoughts. We also have in the suttas the 5 powers, the balang, I think is, if I recall the Pali right, the faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. There's some overlap in this list with the parami that I was just referring to, for example, with energy and with wisdom specifically. And so these are other qualities that could be cultivated over time to feed into the power of your mind. So that if you find yourself in this kind of a predicament where you're trying one thing after another and still the unwholesome thoughts won't go away, that these kinds of spiritual qualities can support your mind and help you to manipulate it and do with it what you want. In this case, forgetting the unwholesome thoughts, and then bringing the attention back to the original meditation object you wanted to practice with. Yes. Okay. All right. Then the next paragraph has the fourth kind of sign. If, while he is trying to forget those thoughts and is not giving attention to them, there still arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion, then he should give attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts. When he gives attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts, then any evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With the abandoning of them, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. Just as a man walking fast might consider, why am I walking fast? What if I walk slowly? And he would walk slowly. Then he might consider, why am I walking slowly? What if I stand? And he would stand. Then he might consider, why am I standing? What if I sit? And he would sit. Then he might consider, why am I sitting? What if I lie down? And he would lie down. By doing so, he would substitute for each grosser posture one that was subtler. So too, when a bhikkhu gives attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. It's really something. I'm really quite riveted by the metaphors that Buddha gives in these examples, the similes. So capable, so clear. They really so accurately describe how it would work. I think. So I find it very impressive. In this one, he's saying, so what if you're trying to forget those thoughts? And not give attention to them, and there still arise in you evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion. And he says, then what you should do is give attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts. Okay. And so this is interesting because it is quite specific. It says stilling the thought formation of those thoughts. So this doesn't mean trying to still the thoughts directly. Not giving attention directly to the thoughts and trying to still them directly. You might say, if you understand what I mean. But actually, it's focusing in on the thought formation of those thoughts. Interestingly, in the metaphor, about the man who's first walking, and then later he's sitting, and then he's lying down. It begins with these kinds of thoughts. Why am I walking fast? What if I walk slowly? Okay. And then paying it, with this thinking process, then he gradually refines his postures. In meditation, this refers to kind of having quite a bit of sensitivity to the thought process, the processes going on, with a good deal of mindfulness. And the mind, I think, already has to be relatively calm, that you can focus in on this kind of a thing and make this distinction. So that when you're meditating, you're experiencing these kinds of thoughts, you can kind of relax the thinking process in order to still these kinds of thoughts. It requires quite a bit of sensitivity. And so perhaps you can practice with it if you find yourself in the situation, and try to notice the thinking process almost as though it were a physical thing happening in the mind, and see if you can kind of relax it mentally. Be an interesting practice to see how you do, and see how it works over time if you try it from time to time, if the previous remedies don't work. All right. Then the fifth sign in the next paragraph is if, while he is giving attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts, there still arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion, then, with his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, he should beat down, constrain, and crush mind with mind. When, with his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, he beats down, constrains, and crushes mind with mind, then any evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion are abandoned in him and subside. With the abandoning of them, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. Just as a strong man might seize a weaker man by the head or shoulders and beat him down, constrain him, and crush him, so too, when, with his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, a bhikkhu beats down, constrains, and crushes mind with mind, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. All right, it's quite a strong terminology. One of the things I like about this is the Buddha's encouragement to use quite a bit of force, if you have to use your right effort from the Noble Eightfold Path, with all the effort you have, if you need to beat down and crush the unskillful mental states. It brings to mind the kind of the warrior spirit of of some of the meditation masters that they try to pass on to their disciples, saying, you really have to fight the kilesas. You can't just expect them to give up easily, and you have to be willing to fight and really push against them. I remember one teacher I was with. He stood up after the meal, and he'd been admonishing his disciples. After you eat the meal, it's been a long morning already. It's quite hot out. We were in Thailand, and it was their only meal that they'd eaten. It's one meal a day, so after the meal, the monks would feel quite lazy commonly. And so he'd been admonishing them for several days. Don't when you're done here, go right up to your kuti, get on your walking meditation path and practice walking meditation. Make sure you don't get sleepy. Make sure you don't rest and stuff like this. You have to keep trying to make an effort in meditation. Well, after several days of this, it seems like maybe he got kind of fed up or something. And so as we were finishing eating and gathering our things up to leave the eating hall, he stood up and he had the microphone in his hands, and he yells out in Thai, and then he yells into the microphone in English. So he'd learned from someone the English phrase, apparently in preparation for this. He yells out, "If you want to win, you have to fight." And so yeah, the memory stays with me. It stays years later. That he really meant it. Okay, so this one is kind of a straightforward idea. If you're giving attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts, the unwholesome thoughts keep arising. Well, then what can you do? And this is kind of the next recourse. The Buddha says to use your own mind, to crush your mind, to beat down and constrain the mind, so that the evil, unwholesome thoughts cannot arise anymore. And he gives specific instructions. With his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, he should beat down, constrain, and crush mind with mind. Okay, so with his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, he should beat down, constrain, and crush mind with mind. This is another one, and actually all of these. I mentioned the power of your mind, or the strength of your mind, with regard to one of the earlier methodologies for overcoming unwholesome thoughts. And in this one, it seems much more salient. Also, the aspect of power of mind. And again, this is another instance where the spiritual virtues, your parami that you developed over time, or the five powers we find in the suttas, are kind of come in handy. This is where they really come into play, where you use them in this case to actually crush negative tendencies by beating down and constraining your own mind. And there's a story about one Thai meditation master who this was a major aspect of his practice. Actually, it's not one you hear people using very much, actually. But this one meditation master. He's a very highly esteemed meditation master, and he said that that's what he did quite a lot when he was meditating. If he was trying to do his meditation object and other kinds of thoughts started to distract him, he would actually immediately go to this one. He would clench down his teeth and he would press his tongue against the roof of his mouth, and he would kind of crush his own mind with his mind to crush out those negative thoughts, those unwholesome thoughts, and then he would return to his meditation object. And so there we have it, the use of right effort again to overcome unwholesome thinking. All right, then we have the next paragraph, kind of a review and an exhortation. The Buddha goes on to say, bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is giving attention to some sign, knowing to that sign there arise in him evil and unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, with hate, and with delusion. Then when he gives attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, any such evil and unwholesome thoughts are abandoned in him and subside. And with the abandoning of them, his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. When he examines the danger in those thoughts, and then a repetition again about how if you examine the danger in those thoughts, the unwholesome thoughts will be abandoned. And then when he tries to forget those thoughts and does not give attention to them, and a reiteration that the unwholesome thoughts will be abandoned. And then when he gives attention to stilling the thought formation of those thoughts, then a reiteration that this will abandon the unwholesome thoughts. And then finally, when with his teeth clenched and his tongue pressed against the roof of his mouth, he beats down, constrains, and crushes mind with mind, any such evil, unwholesome thoughts are abandoned in him, and his mind becomes steadied internally, quieted, brought to singleness, and concentrated. This bhikkhu is then called a master of the courses of thought. He will think whatever thought he wishes to think, and he will not think any thought that he does not wish to think. He has severed craving, flung off the fetters, and with the complete penetration of conceit, he has made an end of suffering. That is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. So in that last paragraph, we have a summary and a recapitulation of each of the five signs and the methodologies for overcoming those signs and abandoning unwholesome thoughts, so that the mind can be brought to singleness and concentrated. When the practitioner has mastered these kinds of methodologies, then he's called a master of the courses of thought. He will think whatever thought he wishes to think, and he will not think any thought that he does not wish to think. Then it goes on to say, the Buddha says, he has severed craving, flung off the fetters, and with the complete penetration of conceit, he has made an end of suffering. Which is interesting, this is quite a step forward in the process of meditation. Because on the one hand, we've been talking throughout the sutta about stilling the mind, making it concentrated. And now here he talks about severing craving, flinging off the fetters, and penetrating conceit to make an end of suffering. And so this is a kind of a fast forward to through the meditator passing through the insight knowledges with vipassana meditation, all the way to the point of cutting off craving and cutting all the fetters and giving up conceit. The conceit I am of self-view. So this is actually about in making an end of suffering, which of course is also another reference to the final goal of attaining nibbana. So we have to understand this as a leap forward in the process that the Buddha is probably, I think, trying to point out that this process of making the mind concentrated is a critical aspect of the path that feeds directly into the later stages of the path, where the meditator goes through the insight knowledges and expunges the defilements. As it says elsewhere in the suttas, a path without concentration is no path at all. And we see that in the Noble Eightfold Path, that the eighth factor is samadhi, meaning that without concentration, you don't have the Noble Eightfold Path, because the Noble Eightfold, because concentration is one of the constituents of the Noble Eightfold Path. So without it, the Noble Eightfold Path is incomplete. And so I think that this is the reason that Buddha is at the very end. He brings in one sentence the stage of basically of attaining enlightenment, of attaining nibbana, by making an end of suffering. Okay. And fortunately, the bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. I think there's at least one sutta where it says the bhikkhus were not. It just really stands out. As usually the bhikkhus were quite satisfied and delighted with the Blessed One's words. And in this case, they were as well. So I'm sure they profited spiritually quite a lot from it. Okay, my humble opinion. So that is the sutta. Maybe now we'll, as is traditional, we'll take a moment to sadhu the sutta. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right. So again, that was for those of you who may have joined after we started. It wasn't written in the title of the talk today what sutta it would be. It was mentioned it would be Sutta Study, and so what I chose to do was was sutta number 20 from the Majjhima Nikaya, the Vitakka Santana Sutta, which is the removal of distracting thoughts by Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. I was using his translation from the middle-length discourses, okay, the Wisdom Publications middle-length discourses. Of course, it's translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi and Bhikkhu Nyanamoli. He was working off of an initial translation that Bhikkhu Nyanamoli had done, draft. Number 20, the Majjhima Nikaya, the Vitakka Santana Sutta, the removal of distracting thoughts. All right, now, so a number of people have written in to say hello to Anjali, to Sadhu. Go through the list here and say hello, and also see if there are any questions. So you can type in questions now if you like. We have S. Jeff, as I mentioned before, and Karuna, and Poonam Sood, and Tate Carson, Jayanta, Douglas, Rick Thorne. We have someone writing, it looks like a Sinhalese script. I have to apologize, I can't read Sinhalese, but it's very nice to see you writing in also. Yankee Apple and Andy Fu and Sood. Hello, Sood. All saying hello and sending in their Anjalis. We have Niranjan Tulatar. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that accurately, with sadhus, and writing that she's in Nepal, the Buddha's birthplace. Right, sadhu. And then we have Richard and Jay Bowen. And he's noting, he's a comment, he says, Jay Bowen, thank you for the sutta. Right effort is often overlooked, and the removal of distracting thoughts are an important part of it for cultivating the beautiful garden of the mind. Well, that's nice. Nice talking about nice similes. That's another nice simile for the mind that's wholesome. Okay, and then, right, you give the name of the sutta, so we've got it. Jay wrote in the name here also. For those of you who are still uncertain about the name of the sutta, it's in the it's written out in the live stream comments there. Jay Bowen wrote it out for us. And then Rick Thorne saying that the suggestions have been of great help in my practice. And noting the sutta brings to light how little control we can have over our own mind, highlighting not self in our mind. Okay, so that's a good point, Rick, right? Then we have Connie sending in Anjalis, and Poonam also saying he found it very helpful. Right. And more comments. More comments from Jay. Thank you, Jay. And Kit sending in Anjali. Rick Thorne. Okay. And we have Jay Bowen writing in quite a bit. Okay, I won't read out all of the comments, but those of you who'd like to see, there are more comments on the screen in regard to the sutta and the practice. And I wonder if we have any questions from the yogis here? Yes, Philip.
Is the third method akin to withholding nourishment of the unwholesome thoughts?
Okay. Is the third method akin to removing nourishment from the unwholesome thoughts? So kind of starving the unwholesome thoughts. The second method again is if, while he's giving attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome, there still arise in him evil, unwholesome thoughts connected with desire, hatred, and delusion, then he should examine the danger in those thoughts. These thoughts are unwholesome. They are reprehensible. They result in suffering. Okay. So, actually, in regard to starving unwholesome thoughts, and there's a methodology that Buddha talks about in regard to the enlightenment factors and the 5 hindrances. And so I'm trying to see if you remember this accurately, where he talks about starving the hindrances. Okay. And I believe also feeding the hindrances. You can either make the mistake of feeding your hindrances in meditation, or you can starve them. And if you starve them, that's better for you. He uses the metaphor of a fire. If you keep throwing wood and dry grass, for example, on a fire, the fire will keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But if you don't put any more fuel on the fire, then it will have to burn out eventually. Right? Okay. And let's see. I'm not sure I can remember off the top of my head all of the ways that he talks about you can feed your hindrances or starve them. This is a very specific kind of methodology about just thinking about the danger in the unwholesome thoughts. Whereas, if I recall correctly, feeding and starving the hindrances would be referring to things you might actively do that kind of bring up hindrances, or not doing things to remove hindrances. So, for example, if you indulge in food more than you really need to, this can feed the sensual desire, for example. So the Buddha recommends in the suttas that you should eat only in moderation. And so he says a meditator, ideally should eat only 1 meal a day, actually. So it's recommended for the monks to eat 1 meal a day in that way, so that they can starve the hindrance of greed, of sensual desire. Similarly with sleep, he recommends that you should be very moderate in your sleep. So he recommends for a meditation monk to sleep as little as 4 hours a night. Because if you indulge in sleep, if you sleep quite a bit, then it can feed the hindrance of laziness. Okay. These are a couple of examples I can think of. There's usually the recommendation to speak very little. I think that this is directly related to kind of delusion in general and a restless mind, being restless and thinking about many things. And those of us who've practiced meditation for a little while, say you're practicing meditation say you're on a one-day retreat, for example, or on a weekend retreat, and you able to make the mind calmer than it was when you started, and then you engage in conversation with someone, you find, wow, it really stirs up the mind quite a lot. You really start thinking a lot, and then as you walk away from the conversation, your mind is still thinking over things in the conversation. And if you sit down and meditate again, you see it still going. You can see it still going on in the mind. You think, wow, it really made a big impact. Just a little conversation. So the Buddha recommended cutting down on speech, and so. So I think starving the hindrances is more like these kinds of things. Restraint of the sense doors is also related, I think. So not letting the mind go out and to grasp onto signs and features of things. So, for example, if you see an alluring sight and you let the mind go out and you really kind of get involved in it, I think that's going to feed the hindrance of sensual desire. For example, a beautiful sunset, for example, or something like that. If you hear music and you really let yourself get involved in it and enjoy it, then this would feed the hindrance also of sensual desire, that kind of thing. So, right. Perhaps that's one for me to study again, the feeding and starving of hindrances, and the specific recommendations are. If there are any others that I didn't think of. All right. Oh.
I have a question.
Yes, Henry.
So I have heard that when unwholesome thoughts appear in the mind, the best way to handle it is to one of the ways to handle it is to watch the mind, not participate in it, or force it to go away. Because forcing it can make it worse. And you're kind of putting pressure in the mind to not do something. So I'm kind of confused how that aligns with, the main message of this system.
Okay, right.
I heard this from a monk.
Yeah, this from a monk. Yeah. Okay, sure. Well, it may be to some extent, maybe a teacher is tailoring his advice to you, his or her advice to you. That's always an aspect of learning about meditation from your teacher, is that a good teacher will try to, if he or she has had a chance to get to know you and learn about your practice, try to tailor advice to you that he or she thinks is accurate. And then you kind of test out and see how it goes and see what kind of results you get and see if the instructions really helped or not. So maybe that's what I can say in general in relation to this. I think also there's some very common meditation instructions related to, for example, distracting thoughts. For example, Ajahn Chah taught a group of meditators at one point, giving some introductory meditation instructions. He says, if you start thinking of something, say something from the past or the future, you can simply be aware of it and notice and think, well, that's uncertain, or I'm not interested in that right now. And that way you let go of it and you can come back to the breath meditation, which is what he was teaching. He was teaching breath meditation. Similarly, if you hear a sound, for example, you're not really interested in that right now, and then bring the mind back. It's what's known within the Ajahn Chah tradition is one of the techniques for knowing and letting go. So you become aware of that which your mind is kind of obsessing about or involved in, and then you use this technique that for example, Ajahn Chah gave of I'm not interested in that right now, or that's uncertain, to let go of it, and you bring the mind back. Then there's, so that, and in the Mahasi technique, for example, they'll recommend that if you're distracted by something, and you notice it, what you're being distracted by. And if it's a thought, for example, then you simply thinking. And in my understanding of this is another way of kind of knowing and letting go. So you become aware of what is distracting you and pay attention to it. If you have right view, because they emphasize quite a bit in their training, the right view that this kind of thing is impermanent. So you look at it a little bit and notice it, thinking, and the mind will let it go, and you can come back to your meditation object in the Mahasi technique, the breath, for example. Let's see here. So so the idea of not trying to force the thoughts to go away. Is what your instructor said, but rather simply to kind of notice them and be aware of them. Yes.
It's actually one thought ahead.
Okay, great, yeah. And so I wonder if this is what the kind of thing that you had in mind, kind of the knowing and letting go. It also can be can be instructive, I think, to pay attention to what kinds of thoughts keep coming up in the mind. And this can help you with learning about your own thinking process also. What kinds of attachments you have, for example, and habitual ways of thinking, for example. And so that actually you can learn a lot from that as well. I think that at some point, so yeah, you see what kind of results you get from it as well. You might ask him, for example, okay, so I've been doing this for a while, and I wonder what you might recommend for next steps, and relate to him what kinds of things you've learned, for example, and what kind of results you're getting. See what he says.
Yeah, I've seen. I mean, I actually like what spouse was telling me. It helps me. I saw the results. I saw good results.
You saw good results.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, great. Sadhu. Okay.
So I think it was also a matter of tailoring things too.
Okay. Tailoring it to you. Yeah, the meditation instruction. Great. All right. Looks like we have some questions coming in from our viewers. Okay. All right. Some notes of appreciation. Thank you. Okay, so we have a question here from S. Jeff. How does clamping down on thoughts keep them still? I find they return after relaxing the hold. What am I missing in the process? Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I think it's quite a common experience, actually, and so this is a very good question to raise, very beneficial probably to many people. This is it's quite common that if we can kind of still the mind, or in regard to something temporarily, for example, or if we can get the mind to let go of something, that quite often then it'll attach right onto something else, or even back to that same thing again. We might be able to make the mind still temporarily, but then after a moment or two, it'll start thinking over and over again about the same thing all over again. It'd be quite frustrating. I think I related a story a few weeks ago about my own experience, one that I remembered quite saliently when I was on a meditation retreat in a monastery in Thailand. And I kept thinking about somebody who really, really annoyed me. It had been years before, actually. But for some reason at that time, these thoughts kept coming up. And it was so frustrating, because it was the last thing I wanted to do was be thinking about this kind of thing. And also I knew that it was so pointless. I was getting angry and sitting there on my meditation cushion over things that somebody had done years before that had no bearing anymore. They weren't related to anything I was trying to do, or it didn't make any difference if I thought about them. There was no benefit in thinking about them. And so I tried various methodologies. So, for example, I tried doing a loving kindness meditation, for example, or just redirecting my mind back to the breath again, or tried knowing and letting go, like noticing I was thinking these kinds of thoughts and letting go of them. This is uncertain, and seeing the danger and the suffering and thinking this way, and how the heart would give rise to anger, and seeing how this is suffering, and why do I keep obsessing over this kind of thing when it's bringing me suffering? And not really kind of like thinking about it, talking about it now. I'm talking about it. It might sound like going in a thinking process, kind of talking in the head, but more like with awareness, noticing, noticing, oh, this is suffering, this is being angry, for example, or just thinking about this, the wheels turning over and over and over again. It's a very unpleasant process. So I tried many of these kind of techniques we just went over, and I found that the thoughts kept coming up. And eventually I was successful in kind of getting rid of them. What I did, what seemed to work in the end, was these thoughts were coming up, and I was sitting there on my meditation cushion in front of my altar in my kuti, that's my meditation cabin. And I just started yelling out the 32 parts of the body, from the 32 parts of the body meditation. So hair of the head, hair of the body, nails, teeth, skin, which is just kind of driving the thoughts out of my mind. And this actually, for the moment, it worked. It got the thoughts out of my mind. And then I went into my meditation technique. The meditation technique I was like always basically trying to practice, my main meditation theme. And I was able to get into it. I was able to practice with it, and then keep going on my retreat. And these kinds of thoughts didn't bother me anymore. And I think why that eventually worked in the end was that it was the culmination of this long process. That it wasn't necessarily the 32 parts of the body technique that really was the key. Because actually, the 32 parts of the body don't have any, are not really a recommended meditation method for this particular kind of circumstance. Rather, something like loving kindness would be. But I think all of the work I'd put in over time and all the different methodologies eventually culminated. They kind of paid off. And this just happened to be the last bit. This method of trying to drive the thoughts out of my mind with the 32 parts of the body by yelling this out in my cabin at the altar. And so I think that's part of the process of meditation is persevering. Having the patience and the endurance to persevere and to keep putting in the effort over time. We also put in place in our lives kind of the fundamental supports for meditation, and try to get rid of the things in our lives that are counter to our meditation, that cause us to have unskillful mental states, to the extent that we can. So, for example, we monastics are kind of take this as far as we can, separating ourselves out, living out in the forest, for example, if we live in the forest, in a very quiet place, all alone in our own cabin. Doing things like eating one meal a day and sleeping little to starve the hindrances and not talking to anyone. most of the time and meditating a lot. So if you, to the extent that you can simplify your life and starve the hindrances, as I was talking about before in response to the question, and then persevere in putting forth the effort, over time you develop your spiritual virtues and they strengthen the mind and enable you to eventually see some real progress. So that's one aspect of this that I can offer. And additionally, I think that if you practice, even for a short period of time, if you're practicing for 20 minutes a day, or say 2 sessions of 20 minutes a day, for example, and you sit down and meditate and you find yourself, you have a lot of thoughts going on in the mind. You may feel uncomfortable in your body, because you're not used to sitting. Maybe you're sitting on the floor cross-legged, but you're not used to doing that. And I think you'll find usually that if you put forth some effort, you keep trying, to stay with your meditation theme, you may find that within 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you usually are not really on your meditation theme. But occasionally you are, even if it's your breath and you just notice, you're mindful of your breath just for a few breaths. That at the end of the meditation session, overall, actually, you're calmer and you feel better than you did when you started. And so, even if you find the mind then quickly goes off the meditation object again, while you're meditating, to take heart and to notice that actually there is still some benefit in the practice. That even a little bit of success really helps you feel better. And cumulatively over time, you practice over time will yield results that are greater and greater also. All right. Okay. So different ideas. Okay. Okay. Well, it's almost 9 o'clock. And I wonder if there are any last questions from the group here. Okay. And perhaps I could mention, there's something I wanted to mention before we sign off, in relation to the question about watching your thoughts, the theory you brought up, and in relation to this question about clamping down on the mind. And then the mind still giving rise to those thoughts again. As soon as you finish clamping down on the mind, it will just rise up again, kind of thing. I was talking about that time when I kept obsessively thinking about something from the past that somebody had done that made me angry. I kept reliving that experience in my head over and over again. One of the things I noticed in my meditation process was that I sometimes would backtrack. How is it that I started thinking about this person and I got angry again? This keeps happening. How is it this went about? And so I kind of backtracked in my mind through the thinking process and noticed the sequence of thoughts that led up to that. And so I noticed, okay, well, what it was is actually I started thinking about this place where the person was. And then I started thinking, then for some reason that person came to mind, even though I wasn't necessarily thinking about them in particular to start with. And thinking about them, even something that was quite benign, something that was very good about them. But then eventually I started thinking about that thing that they did that really drove me nuts. It seemed like no matter what, if I started thinking about them, I would start thinking about that, and then I started getting mad. And then so I thought, and then even if it started, the reason I started thinking about them was that place. I started thinking about that place. And so I started to pay attention to this in my meditation. As soon as I started to think about that place, or if I got as far as thinking about him, I would try to, I would just divert the mind there. I would start identifying that as an unskillful thinking process, in my case, because it always seemed to lead inexorably to me thinking about the thoughts that were giving me so much trouble. And then so I would divert the mind using techniques like the ones that are discussed in the sutta, or at least be more present with my mindfulness to go back to my meditation object. And not let the mind wander off of it into thinking about that place or even anything else really, other than the meditation object I was trying to focus on. So that's one benefit I got from kind of examining and noticing the thinking process. So it relates to your question also.
Yeah, I would also like the idea of when this also would recommend just watch it as a comedy show, this is how samsara is. How funny am I reacting to this thing? I'm not gonna hold on to these grudges in my next life, so why am I holding them? Or it's not gonna bring you benefit to Nibbana, and you're just causing yourself suffering. So just let it go, and like just watch, or let it go, and like watch how silly the mind is, kind of. So that helps me.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
Sadhu, sadhu. How silly the mind is. How unskillful it is. How much suffering it brings us into. All right. I guess that's it. To everyone, I would like to say sadhu anumotana, your attention to the sutta, and good luck in your practice. May you all prosper in Dhamma. Tonight we have monk chat, so we'll have 2 or 3 monastics answering questions. If you have more questions that come up, any questions you've had, feel free to write them in tonight. It'll be 7:30. Tomorrow night, that's Saturday night, here at Empty Cloud, we'll have a public Dhamma program, guided meditation, a Dhamma talk, and question and answer session from 6 to 7:30. And then on Sunday from 1 to 4, a longer Dhamma session with a talk and question and answer and guided meditation, also walking meditation too. All right, take care everyone, and best wishes for your practice.